drunk beauty accidentally kisses a stranger, shocked to discover he's a powerful CEO. Hello, my lovely viewers. A warm welcome to each and every one of you. I'm so happy you're here. I have something incredibly special to share with you today, a story that's close to my heart and filled with deep love, passion, and unforgettable moments. But before we dive into it, I really want to know how active and engaged you are with this story, because trust me, you're going to fall in love with these two characters. So please take a moment to comment "active" below to let me know you're here and ready to experience this incredible journey with me. May this story bring you peace, joy, and a heart full of warmth. May you feel the love and connection through every word and find inspiration in the bond these characters share. Also, if you haven't already, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single chapter of this amazing story. Your support means the world to me, and it helps me keep creating these heartfelt stories for you. Now, sit back, relax, and let's begin this super story. The city was alive that Saturday night, a chaotic blend of neon lights flashing across the dark sky, the sound of cars honking, and the steady hum of music drifting from the bars and clubs that lined the streets. The air was thick with excitement and the scent of spilled alcohol, cheap cologne, and the sweet perfume of glamorous women dancing under the strobes of light. Among the crowd, Mishi stood out like a star against the dark sky. At 26, she was effortlessly captivating, a vision of smooth brown skin that glowed under the streetlights, her perfectly braided hair cascading down her shoulders, framing her delicate yet striking face. Her wide, expressive eyes, dark and enchanting, glimmered beneath long lashes, and her sculpted clear brows added to the magnetic pull of her gaze. Dressed in a sleek black dress that hugged her hourglass figure perfectly, accentuating her slim waist and curvy hips, she was the embodiment of effortless elegance. The dress had a slit that ran up her thigh, teasing glimpses of flawless skin as she stumbled slightly in her high heels. Her lips, painted a deep shade of red, parted slightly as she navigated the uneven pavement, her mind clouded by the haze of too many drinks. Her steps were uneven, her body swaying as the alcohol pulsing through her veins dulled her senses. She had gone out with friends to forget the emptiness clawing at her chest, to drown the loneliness that had crept into her heart lately. But now she found herself alone, the cool night air brushing against her exposed skin. As she stumbled toward the street, her vision blurred slightly, and then her gaze landed on him, a tall, commanding figure leaning casually against a sleek black car parked beneath the dim glow of a street lamp. He was breathtakingly handsome, with sharp cheekbones, a strong jawline, and eyes so intense they seemed to cut through the night itself. His dark, wavy hair was styled with effortless perfection, and his neatly trimmed beard added a rugged edge to his otherwise polished appearance. He wore a fitted black suit that molded perfectly to his broad shoulders and lean waist, the crisp white shirt beneath it open at the collar, revealing a sliver of tanned skin. His hands were tucked casually into his pockets, his gaze calm and piercing as he surveyed the street with quiet authority. Something about him called to her, even in her drunken state. A magnetic pull she couldn't resist. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she stumbled toward him, her heels clicking against the pavement. She didn't know why, didn't stop to think. She just knew she needed to taste him. Without warning, her hands brushed against the hard planes of his chest, her fingers curling into the fabric of his suit jacket as she lifted herself onto her toes. Her lips crashed against his in a desperate, heated kiss. Jason Roy tensed in shock as her soft lips molded against his mouth, her breath warm and sweet with the faint taste of alcohol. His hands instinctively moved to steady her, gripping her slender waist as her body pressed against his. Her lips were soft and warm, tasting like wild honey mixed with danger and sweetness. His pulse roared in his ears, the craving surging through him, immediate and primal. He could have pushed her away, he should have, but something about her delicate frame, the vulnerability laced into her boldness, made him hold her tighter. His hands pressed into the curve of her waist, the heat of her body sinking into his skin through the thin fabric of her dress. He kissed her back for a fleeting second, unable to resist the temptation of her softness, before forcing himself to pull away. His chest heaved, his breath uneven as his gaze dropped to her face. Her eyes were half-lidded, dark with the fog of intoxication. "Easy," he murmured, his voice low and steady, even as his pulse raced uncontrollably. But Mishy's body sagged against him, her strength slipping away as the effects of the alcohol took over. "Hey!" Jason's hand slid to her shoulders, shaking her gently, but her head lolled forward, resting against his chest. A deep, protective instinct surged through him. He glanced around the street, empty except for the distant glow of headlights far down the road. He could leave her here, call someone, but the thought of walking away from her, of leaving her vulnerable, was unacceptable. Gently he slipped one arm beneath her knees and the other around her back, lifting her effortlessly into his arms. Her head fell against his shoulder, her breath soft against his neck. His jaw tightened as he carried her toward the car. The weight of her body against him, the warmth of her skin, was igniting something dangerous in him, something he had long taught himself to suppress. He laid her gently across the back seat, brushing a loose braid away from her face. Her lips were slightly parted, and even asleep, she looked heartbreakingly beautiful. Jason slid into the driver's seat, his hands gripping the wheel as he started the car. His heart was thudding painfully against his ribs. He had never felt this way before, never reacted to a woman like this. He drove to his villa in silence, stealing glances at her through the rearview mirror. The rise and fall of her chest, the soft curve of her lips, everything about her was pulling him in. When he arrived, he carried her inside with ease, laying her down on the enormous bed in the guest room. He pulled the blankets over her, pausing to run a finger down the curve of her cheek. His body ached with the memory of her lips on his. He stood there for a moment, just watching her sleep, his heart caught in his throat. Who was she? And why did it feel like his entire world had shifted the moment she touched him? He forced himself to step back, his fists clenching at his sides as he left the room. His chest was tight with unfamiliar longing, his mind swirling with the taste of her lips and the feel of her body pressed against his. Jason Roy was a man who controlled his world with precision and power. But tonight, a beautiful stranger had walked into his life and shattered that control with a single kiss. And somehow he already knew. This was only the beginning. Jason's arms tightened around Mishy's delicate frame as he carried her effortlessly through the grand iron gates of his sprawling villa. The towering marble pillars and floor-to-ceiling glass windows reflected the moonlight, casting a soft glow over the sleek, modern architecture. The villa was perched on a hilltop, surrounded by a manicured garden filled with white roses and lavender that gave off a subtle, calming fragrance. Jason's heart pounded violently in his chest as he stepped through the enormous oak doors, the coolness of the marble floor beneath his feet doing nothing to calm the heat flooding his veins. The weight of her soft body against him was dangerously addictive. His jaw clenched as he felt the rise and fall of her chest beneath the thin fabric of her dress, the soft brush of her breath against the crook of his neck igniting something primal in him. He knew he shouldn't be feeling this way. It was reckless, dangerous. But the memory of her lips crashing against his, the sweet taste of her mouth, and the feel of her soft curves pressing into him had already branded itself into his mind. He crossed the vast living room, the dark leather furniture and modern glass sculptures reflecting the dim light of the crystal chandelier overhead. His steps were soundless against the Persian rug as he ascended the wide staircase leading to the private wing of the villa. Mishi stirred slightly in his arms, her head falling closer to his neck as a soft, breathy sigh escaped her parted lips. His muscles tightened. God, how could someone be so effortlessly beautiful even in sleep? He pushed open the door to the master bedroom, the room bathed in soft amber lighting from the wall sconces. The enormous king-sized bed, dressed in crisp white sheets, sat beneath a large window overlooking the glittering city skyline. He carried her to the bed with careful precision, lowering her gently onto the mattress as though she were the most fragile thing in the world. His hands lingered at her waist for a second longer than necessary, feeling the warmth of her skin through the fabric of her dress before he forced himself to let go. She looked ethereal lying there, her brown skin glowing under the soft light, her braided hair fanned out across the pillows. Jason's gaze trailed over her delicate features, the elegant arch of her brows, the fullness of her lips, and the soft rise and fall of her chest. He crouched down beside her, his hand hesitating before brushing back a stray braid that had fallen across her cheek. His fingertips tingled at the contact. She sighed softly, her lips parting as her head turned toward his touch. His throat tightened painfully. Who was this woman? And why was he already feeling like he'd known her forever? Jason had kissed plenty of women before, but none of them had made him feel like this. Her kiss had shaken him to his core, unraveling years of carefully controlled restraint. His gaze dropped to her lips, those lips that had haunted him from the second they touched his. He could still taste her sweetness, feel the way her body had melted against him. His breathing grew shallow, and he forced himself to stand, dragging a hand through his dark hair as he tried to steady his racing pulse. He pulled the soft white duvet over her body, making sure she was comfortable. His hand lingered at her shoulder before he stepped back, his eyes never leaving her face. "Sleep well, beautiful," he whispered, his voice low and rough. His chest tightened painfully as he turned toward the chair near the bed. He sank into it with a heavy breath, his elbows resting on his knees as his hands clasped together. His gaze remained fixed on her sleeping form, his mind swirling with unanswerable questions. Who was she? Why had she kissed him? And why did it feel like the entire world had shifted the second her lips touched his? Jason wasn't the type to be thrown off balance, but this woman, this stunning, mysterious stranger, had already managed to burrow under his skin in ways he couldn't explain. He watched the slow, steady rise and fall of her chest, the soft glow of her skin beneath the dim light. His eyes darkened as they trailed the curve of her collarbone, the smooth line of her neck. A hunger coiled low in his stomach, but he pushed it down, forcing himself to remain composed. He didn't know who she was, didn't know what had led her to that moment outside the club. But he knew one thing: he wasn't letting her slip away. His fingers tightened into fists against his knees as a quiet protectiveness settled into his chest. She was vulnerable, fragile, and alone. He couldn't ignore that. His mind drifted back to the feel of her body pressed against his, the softness of her lips yielding to his. He had only kissed her for a fleeting second, but that brief contact had set his entire body on fire. He leaned back in the chair, one hand lifting to his jaw as his gaze lingered on her face. His heart thudded unevenly in his chest. Mishi shifted slightly in her sleep, a soft moan escaping her lips as she turned toward him. Jason's body tensed, his gaze darkening as a possessive heat coursed through his veins. He had never felt this way before, this raw, primal need to protect, to claim. He was a man who thrived on control, who built his life around order and precision. But tonight, one kiss from this woman had left him spiraling. He scrubbed a hand down his face, exhaling slowly. He had to calm down. He barely knew her, and yet, it didn't matter. He couldn't walk away from her. He couldn't let her disappear from his life as easily as she had stumbled into it. His gaze softened as he watched her sleep, the tension in his chest giving way to quiet warmth. His lips curled slightly as he leaned his head back against the chair. He'd get answers in the morning. For now, he would let her sleep, let her recover. But deep down, Jason already knew. This wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. Mishy's head throbbed painfully as she stirred beneath the soft white sheets, the faint scent of lavender clinging to the crisp fabric. Her eyes fluttered open, the morning light spilling through the sheer curtains of the enormous floor-to-ceiling windows. A golden glow washed over the luxurious room, highlighting the smooth marble floors and the sleek black and gold accents of the furniture. Her vision was blurred, her head pounding from the effects of the alcohol, and for a brief moment she had no idea where she was. Panic tightened in her chest as she sat up suddenly, her heart racing. Her wide brown eyes darted around the unfamiliar surroundings, the massive bed with its plush pillows, the elegant chandelier hanging above, the designer paintings on the wall. Where was she? How did she get here? Her fingers pressed against her temples as she tried to steady her breathing. The last thing she remembered was the crowded club, the pulsing music, and the overwhelming dizziness that followed after she'd had one too many drinks. Her mind spun, trying to piece together the fragmented memories, but it was like grasping at smoke. Suddenly, the sound of soft footsteps echoed through the room. Her eyes shot toward the doorway as a tall, devastatingly handsome man walked in, holding a glass of water in one hand and a bottle of aspirin in the other. His tousled dark hair fell slightly over his forehead, and the sharp lines of his jaw and cheekbones made her breath hitch. His intense eyes, dark and calm, settled on her with a quiet confidence that made her stomach flip. He wore a fitted black t-shirt and gray sweatpants that hung low on his hips, his muscular frame impossible to ignore. Mishy's mouth parted slightly as her gaze swept over him, but then reality slammed into her, and her heart began to race. "Good morning," he said smoothly, his deep voice sending shivers down her spine. He walked toward her with a calm ease, setting the glass of water on the nightstand beside her. She pulled the white sheet up to her chest, her wide eyes fixed on him. Who are you? Where am I?" Her voice trembled as confusion and fear warred in her chest. Jason's lips curled into a soft, knowing smile as he sat down on the edge of the bed, his eyes never leaving hers. "Relax," he said calmly. "You're safe." His voice was low and steady, and somehow it made her heart pound even harder. "That's not an answer," she said, her voice sharp despite the tremor in it. Her gaze darted toward the door, her muscles tensing. She had no idea who this man was or how she had ended up in his bed. A flicker of amusement danced in Jason's eyes as he leaned back slightly, his hands resting on his thighs. "You don't remember?" His gaze sharpened, his eyes darkening with an intensity that made her pulse stutter. "Remember what?" she demanded. Jason's smile deepened as he leaned closer, his face only inches from hers. "You kissed me last night," he said smoothly. Mishy's breath caught, her entire body freezing as his words sank in. Her lips parted in disbelief. "No," she whispered. That's impossible." Jason chuckled softly, the sound low and rough, sending heat curling through her veins. "Trust me," he murmured. "It happened. And I have to say..." His eyes darkened as they flicked down to her lips. "It was unforgettable." Mishy's cheeks flamed as horror rushed through her. Her hand flew to her mouth as if trying to erase any evidence of what he'd just said. "You're lying," she accused, her voice sharp with desperation. "There's no way." "I'm not lying," Jason interrupted smoothly, his gaze locked on hers. "You stumbled out of the club, kissed me like your life depended on it, and then passed out in my arms." His eyes softened as he watched her struggle to process his words. "I had to bring you here. You could barely stand." Mishy's head spun as flashes of the night before rushed back in hazy fragments, the loud music, the heat of the crowd, and then lips, a hard chest, strong hands. Her stomach tightened as a wave of embarrassment crashed over her. Oh God. No way. Her eyes darted toward Jason, who was watching her with calm amusement. I don't believe you, she insisted, even though her heart was already betraying her. Jason's gaze darkened as he leaned in even closer, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. Shall I remind you? His voice was low and dangerous, sending a shiver down her spine. Mishy's breath hitched as her gaze dropped to his lips. Her pulse hammered violently in her chest as the memory of his taste, the feel of his mouth on hers, flickered across her mind. Her cheeks burned. "You're insane," she whispered. Jason's eyes glinted with quiet amusement. "Maybe," he murmured. "Or maybe you're the one who started this." Mishy's heart thudded painfully against her ribs as she scooted back on the bed, clutching the sheet to her chest like a lifeline. "Why would you even bring me here?" she demanded. Jason's expression softened slightly. "Because I couldn't leave you there," he said simply. "You were vulnerable. I wasn't going to let anyone take advantage of you." His gaze darkened as his jaw tightened. "And if I'm being honest, I didn't want to let you go." Her breath hitched as his confession settled in the air between them. Her gaze locked with his, and for a moment, the intensity of his stare made her feel dizzy all over again. "I can't stay here," she whispered, even though a part of her wanted to. Jason's gaze sharpened. "Then don't," he said quietly. "But don't pretend that nothing happened." Mishy's pulse hammered in her ears as Jason stood and walked toward the door. He glanced over his shoulder, his gaze unreadable. "I'll give you space," he said softly. "But don't think for a second that I'm letting you disappear." He gave her one last piercing look before disappearing down the hall. Mishy's breath came in shallow gasps as the silence settled around her. Her hand brushed against her lips as the memory of his mouth on hers lingered like a ghost. Her heart raced as her mind struggled to make sense of everything. Who was this man? Why did her body react to him like this? And more importantly, why did she already want more? Mishy's breath quickened as Jason's words echoed in her ears, her heart hammering violently against her chest. "You kissed me last night," he had said, his voice low and steady, his dark eyes piercing through her like a laser. Her fingers trembled as they clutched the soft white sheets, her mind spinning out of control. How could she have done that? How could she have been so careless, so out of control, to kiss a man she didn't even know? And not just any man, a man like Jason, a man whose presence filled the room with an intensity so thick it made it hard to breathe. Her pulse was erratic, her cheeks burning with a mix of shame and confusion. She needed to get out of here. Now she swung her legs over the edge of the bed, the coolness of the marble floor shocking against her bare feet. Her body tensed as she stood, clutching the sheet tightly around her slender frame. Jason's eyes darkened as he watched her, his gaze calm but intense, as if he could sense the panic radiating off her in waves. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice low and steady. But there was an edge beneath it, a quiet authority that made her insides coil with tension. I need to go," Mishy stammered, stepping away from the bed, her wide eyes darting toward the door. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears as the reality of the situation pressed down on her. She was in a stranger's villa, a luxurious villa owned by a man whose lips she had tasted, whose touch had made her body ignite even though she had been too drunk to fully comprehend it. Her body still remembered the warmth of his hands on her waist, the feel of his strong chest against hers. Heat flushed through her veins at the memory, making her even more desperate to escape. Jason's eyes narrowed slightly as he rose to his feet, his tall frame towering over her. His movements were fluid, controlled, almost predatory. "Mishy," he said softly, his tone deceptively calm. "You don't have to leave." His hand reached out toward her, his long fingers gently brushing against her wrist. The contact sent a spark shooting through her veins, but she flinched away as if burned. "Don't," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her panic. Jason's brows furrowed slightly, but his hand didn't tighten around her wrist. It remained light, gentle, as if he was afraid of scaring her. "You're safe here," he said quietly, his eyes searching hers. His expression softened as he watched the conflict flash across her face. "I won't hurt you." Mishy's breath hitched as his words settled in her chest, making her heart twist painfully. Why did he have to look at her like that, with such quiet intensity, with such calm control when she felt like she was falling apart? Why did he have to make her feel safe when her instincts were screaming at her to run? "No," she said suddenly, shaking her head as her pulse spiked with fear. "This was a mistake." Her voice was tight, raw with confusion. "I never should have kissed you. I don't even know you." Jason's gaze darkened, his jaw tightening slightly at her words. His hand loosened on her wrist, his fingers slowly sliding away from her skin. A flicker of something dangerous flashed in his eyes, but his expression remained calm. "Maybe you don't know me," he said quietly, his voice low and steady. "But I know what I felt last night, and so did you." Mishy's chest tightened painfully as her gaze locked with his. She hated how easily his words slipped beneath her defenses, how her body reacted to the quiet intensity in his eyes. She could still taste him on her lips. She could still feel the warmth of his breath against her skin. I can't," she whispered, her voice trembling as her eyes burned with unshed tears. Jason's expression softened as he watched her struggle. "You don't have to be afraid," he said gently. "I'm not asking for anything. I just don't want you to run." His words sent a strange ache through her chest, but the fear was stronger. Mishy pulled her wrist free from his grasp, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Her gaze darted toward the door, panic coiling in her throat. "I need to leave," she repeated, her voice sharp. "I'm sorry, Jason, but this was a mistake." She turned toward the door, her bare feet barely making a sound against the marble floor as she rushed toward the exit. Jason's body tensed, his hand curling into a fist at his side as he watched her go. His calm mask slipped for a brief moment, and a flash of desperation crossed his face. "Mishy!" His voice was rough, strained with something deeper. But she didn't look back. Her hand curled around the sleek brass handle, and without another word, she pulled open the door and slipped through it. The sound of her footsteps echoed down the hall as she fled. Jason stood frozen, his chest rising and falling with deep, measured breaths. His gaze remained fixed on the empty doorway, his eyes darkening with a quiet intensity. He had never felt this way before. No woman had ever shaken his control the way she had. The taste of her lips lingered on his mouth, haunting him. He could still feel the warmth of her body against his chest, the softness of her breath against his skin. And now she was gone. A muscle in his jaw twitched as he inhaled slowly, trying to calm the storm raging beneath the surface of his controlled exterior. He should have let her go. She wasn't his problem. She had kissed him in a drunken haze, and now she was running from it. But Jason couldn't shake the hollow ache settling deep in his chest. He wasn't the kind of man to chase after anyone. Women chased him. He had never tasted vulnerability. Not like this. He had never wanted to hold someone back before. But Mishy, she was different. The way she had looked at him with those wide, confused eyes, the way her lips had trembled when she spoke his name, it stirred something dangerous inside him. And now that she was gone, that dangerous feeling had only grown stronger. He didn't know her, but he was already craving her. And Jason Roy wasn't a man who let things slip through his fingers. His gaze darkened as a quiet resolve settled over him. She might have run from him today, but this wasn't over, not even close. Jason sat behind his massive mahogany desk, his fingers pressed tightly against his temples as Mishy's face haunted him relentlessly. It had been weeks since she'd fled from his villa, but the taste of her lips, the warmth of her trembling body pressed against his, and the frantic way her wide brown eyes had stared at him before she bolted, it all refused to leave his mind. He was a man who thrived on control, who built his empire on logic and calculated decisions. He never allowed his emotions to get the best of him. Women came and went, but they were never more than passing distractions, fleeting moments of pleasure that dissolved as soon as the night ended. But Mishi, she was different. The way she'd kissed him without hesitation, without reason. She had ignited something deep within him, something primal and uncontrollable. Jason had tried to push her from his mind, drowning himself in work, in the cold comfort of business meetings and profit margins. But every night when he closed his eyes, her face was there, those soft brown eyes looking at him with a mix of fear and longing. His chest tightened painfully as he leaned back in his leather chair, his jaw clenching with frustration. He had never chased a woman before. He had never needed to. They always came to him willingly, craving his attention, begging for a moment of his time. But Mishi had walked away, and now he was left with an unbearable ache in his chest that refused to fade. He had spent days trying to find her himself, scrolling through security footage from the club, contacting people in his vast network for any trace of her. Nothing. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. He was losing sleep, his normally composed exterior beginning to fray at the edges. His obsession with her was growing dangerous, and he knew it. But he didn't care. He needed to see her again, to touch her, to make her understand that running away from him was not an option. He wasn't the kind of man who let things slip through his fingers. And Mishi, she had become the one thing he couldn't control. His phone buzzed on the desk, cutting through his turbulent thoughts. Jason's dark eyes narrowed as his assistant's voice crackled through the line. "Sir, I have news." Jason sat up straighter, his pulse spiking. "Tell me." His voice was sharp, commanding. There was a brief hesitation before his assistant said, "We found her." Jason's breath hitched, his body instantly coiling with tension. "Where?" His voice was low and dangerous. The sound of rustling papers filled the line. "She's working as a storekeeper at a small shop in Texas," the assistant replied. "I'm sending you the file now." Jason's hand tightened into a fist as a flood of adrenaline rushed through his veins. His laptop beeped, and within seconds, a file opened on the screen. His eyes sharpened as he stared at the grainy image of Mishi standing behind a counter. Her dark braids pulled back into a loose ponytail. She was wearing a simple white blouse and jeans, her expression calm but guarded. Jason's jaw clenched as he stared at the photo. Even in a blurry image, her beauty was undeniable. Those full lips that had once pressed against his, those wide eyes that had haunted his dreams every night since she'd left. His chest tightened painfully as his thumb brushed over the screen, tracing the outline of her face. He had spent weeks imagining this moment, wondering how it would feel to finally know where she was. And now that he knew, he wasn't going to waste another second. Jason stood abruptly, his chair scraping across the marble floor. His long fingers slid over the surface of his desk as he grabbed his keys and strode toward the door. "Prepare the car," he barked into the phone. "I'm going to Texas." His assistant's voice wavered. "Sir, are you sure that's necessary? I can arrange—" "No," Jason cut him off sharply. "I need to see her myself." His eyes darkened as he stepped into the elevator, the steel doors sliding shut behind him. His reflection stared back at him from the polished metal, his sharp features tense with anticipation. He had never driven this far for anyone before. He had never chased anyone before. But Mishi wasn't just anyone. She was the woman who had kissed him without hesitation, the woman who had run from him with fear in her eyes, and Jason was determined to find out why. The drive to Texas was long, but Jason barely noticed the passing miles. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension as the endless stretch of road blurred beneath him. His mind was focused solely on her, on the moment he would finally see her again. What would she say? Would she try to run again? His jaw tightened at the thought. Number. This time he wouldn't let her slip away. His sleek black car pulled up in front of the small shop, the contrast between the humble building and his powerful presence almost laughable. Jason stepped out of the car, his tailored black suit crisp and immaculate despite the long drive. His polished shoes clicked against the pavement as he approached the shop, his dark eyes narrowing as he spotted her through the glass window. Mishi stood behind the counter, her eyes focused downward as she organized a row of candy bars. His pulse spiked at the sight of her, his breath catching in his throat. God, she was beautiful. More beautiful than he remembered. Her skin glowed beneath the harsh store lights, her dark braids falling over one shoulder as she bit her lip in concentration. Jason pushed open the door, the small bell above the frame chiming softly. Mishi's head lifted at the sound, and the moment her eyes locked with his, her entire body went rigid. Her lips parted, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Jason?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Jason stepped toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. "Mishi," he said, his voice low and steady. Her hand gripped the edge of the counter as her breath quickened. "What are you doing here?" Jason's gaze darkened as he closed the distance between them, his hand brushing over the smooth wood of the counter. "Did you really think you could disappear?" he said softly, his voice edged with quiet intensity. Mishi's chest rose and fell rapidly, her eyes darting toward the door as panic flared across her face. I didn't think you'd come looking for me." Jason's lips curled into a slow, dangerous smile. "That was your first mistake." Her eyes widened and Jason's hand reached out, his fingers brushing against hers where they rested on the counter. She flinched slightly, but she didn't pull away. "You ran from me," Jason said, his voice low and rough. "But I don't let things slip through my fingers, Mishi." Her throat bobbed as she swallowed hard, her eyes shimmering with uncertainty. "Jason, Her voice trailed off as Jason's hand curled over hers, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I'm not leaving until you tell me why you ran," he said softly, his gaze dark and unwavering. Mishi's breath hitched and Jason leaned in, his eyes burning into hers. "And this time," he said darkly, "I'm not letting you go." Jason stood outside the small store, his heart thundering against his ribcage as his sharp gaze locked on the woman inside. Through the glass window he could see her, Mishi, the woman who had occupied every corner of his mind since that fateful night. She stood behind the counter, her delicate hands folding a stack of neatly pressed clothes, her dark braids falling over her shoulder as she focused intently on her work. His breath quickened at the sight of her, his chest tightening with the familiar ache that had plagued him since the moment she'd walked away from his villa. For weeks, he had dreamed of this moment, fantasized about what he would say, how he would approach her. But now that he was here, standing just feet away from her, his usual steel-like confidence wavered. Jason's hand curled around the brass handle of the door, and with a steadying breath, he pushed it open. A soft chime rang out as he stepped inside. Mishi's head lifted at the sound, her wide brown eyes locking on his figure as he strode toward her with measured, purposeful steps. Her lips parted in shock, the color draining from her face as the clothes slipped from her hands and tumbled to the counter. "Jason." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Jason's dark eyes softened as he took another step toward her, his powerful frame radiating quiet intensity. "Hello, Mishi." She blinked rapidly, her breathing quickening as her gaze darted toward the door, as if considering an escape. Jason's jaw tightened. Not this time. He wouldn't let her run from him again. What are you doing here?" Her voice trembled, the wariness in her expression making his chest ache. He smiled faintly, but his eyes burned with raw sincerity. "I've been looking for you," he said, his voice low and steady. Mishy's lips parted in disbelief. "What?" Jason moved closer, closing the space between them until he was standing right before her, so close that he could feel the faint warmth of her breath against his skin. His eyes traced the soft curve of her jaw, the slight tremble of her lips. "That night," he said softly, his hand brushing over the smooth wood of the counter. "When you kissed me, it wasn't a mistake." Her breath hitched, her wide eyes shimmering with uncertainty. I was drunk. I wasn't thinking." Jason's gaze darkened, his jaw tightening. "Maybe you weren't thinking," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I was." Mishy's eyes widened as Jason's hand reached out, his fingers curling gently around hers where they rested on the counter. She tensed beneath his touch, but she didn't pull away. "You've haunted my thoughts since that night," Jason continued, his voice low and intense. "Every time I close my eyes, I see you. Every time I breathe, I remember the taste of your lips." Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her breathing shallow. "Jason, I don't know what you expect me to say." Jason's gaze softened as he lifted her hand to his lips, brushing a feather-light kiss against her knuckles. Her body shivered beneath his touch. "Say yes," he whispered, her brows knitted in confusion. "Yes, to what?" Jason's eyes burned with quiet determination as he slowly sank to one knee before her. Mishy's breath caught in her throat, her hand trembling in his grasp. "Jason," she whispered, her voice laced with panic. He smiled faintly, his dark eyes never leaving hers. "You've been running from me," he said softly, "but I won't let you run anymore." His hand tightened gently around hers as he reached into the pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. Mishy's eyes widened in disbelief as he opened it, revealing a stunning diamond ring that glittered under the soft store lights. Her hand flew to her mouth as her eyes filled with tears. "Jason," her voice was barely a breath. "I know this is crazy," Jason said, his voice low and steady. "I know you probably think I'm insane, but I don't care. From the moment you kissed me, something inside me shifted. I've never wanted anyone the way I want you. And I'm not just talking about desire, Mishy. I'm talking about you, the way you make me feel, the way you haunt my thoughts, the way you make me want more." Mishy shook her head rapidly, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Jason, you don't even know me." "Then let me know you," Jason said, his gaze dark with quiet intensity. "Give me that chance. Come with me. Be with me. Let me show you how good it can be." Tears shimmered in her eyes as she stared down at him, her lips trembling. "Jason, this is too much. I don't know if I can." "You can," Jason said firmly, "because you feel it too. Don't deny it." Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her gaze darting toward the door as if she was searching for an escape. But Jason's hand tightened around hers, anchoring her. "Don't run from me this time, Mishy," he whispered. "Let me in." A single tear slipped down her cheek, and Jason's thumb brushed it away gently. His eyes softened. "You don't have to answer now," he said quietly. "But just know, I'm not going anywhere." He stood slowly, his hand still wrapped around hers as he leaned in, his breath brushing against her ear. "Say yes," he whispered. "Just say yes." Mishy's eyes filled with tears as Jason's lips brushed tenderly over her forehead. Her heart raced wildly in her chest, her mind spinning with a storm of emotions. "Jason," she whispered, I don't know what to say." Jason smiled faintly, his dark eyes burning with quiet resolve. "Say yes," he repeated. Mishy's trembling hand lifted, brushing over his cheek. Her eyes shimmered with uncertainty, fear, and something deeper, something dangerous and thrilling. Her lips parted, and Jason's gaze darkened as he leaned in closer, his forehead brushing against hers. "Say yes," he whispered one last time. And this time, Mishi's breath hitched as her trembling lips formed the word that would change everything. "Yes," she breathed. Jason's eyes flashed with fierce triumph as his arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her against him. His lips crashed against hers in a passionate, claiming kiss. And this time, Mishi didn't pull away. Her arms slid around his neck as Jason deepened the kiss, his hand cradling the back of her head. When they finally broke apart, Jason's dark eyes glowed with quiet satisfaction. "You're mine now," he whispered against her lips. Mishi's breath hitched as his hand slid over the small of her back. Her eyes shimmered with vulnerability and quiet surrender. "And I'm never letting you go," Jason murmured. And this time, Mishi didn't run. Jason wasn't a man who gave up easily, especially not when it came to something, or rather, someone, who had already taken root so deeply within his soul. From the moment Mishi had whispered, yes, he had made a quiet vow to himself. He wouldn't just win her hand, he would win her heart, fully and completely. But Mishi was guarded, her heart wrapped in cautious layers of doubt and hesitation. Jason sensed it every time he saw the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, every time her smile faltered when he drew too close. But he wasn't discouraged. In fact, it only made him more determined. The morning after their proposal, he had sent a dozen long-stemmed red roses to her store, each one hand-picked, each petal soft and flawless. A small card had been tucked into the arrangement, the ink written in his crisp, elegant handwriting. "Thinking of you already." Mishi had flushed when she read it, her heart pounding as she glanced around the store to make sure no one had seen. But Jason hadn't stopped there. The next day, a delicate white box had appeared on the counter, containing a single gold bracelet engraved with the initials J and M. Alongside it was a note. "This is just the beginning." Mishi's fingers had brushed over the smooth gold, her chest tightening. She should have returned it, should have told him to stop, but she couldn't. And when Jason showed up at the store later that afternoon, standing tall and confident in his charcoal suit with that devastating smile curving his lips, Mishi's pulse had betrayed her. "Did you like the bracelet?" he had asked, his voice low and teasing. Mishi had glared at him, though the heat rising to her cheeks gave her away. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Jason had replied smoothly, his dark eyes glinting with quiet amusement. "Because I'm not going to stop until you realize that you're mine." And he hadn't stopped. Every morning, without fail, another gift arrived. A box of her favorite chocolates, a handwritten poem, a silk scarf in her favorite shade of blue. When Mishi had started protesting, Jason had simply smiled. "I'm a man who knows what he wants," he had said, "and I want you." He began showing up at the store more frequently, offering to walk her home after work, sometimes surprising her with coffee in the mornings before her shift started. One evening, he'd stood outside the store with a bouquet of lilies in one hand and 2 cups of coffee in the other. Mishi had hesitated when he offered one to her, but Jason had smiled, his dark eyes soft. "It's decaf," he had said, "just in case you think I'm trying to keep you awake." Her lips had curled into a reluctant smile as she took the cup from him. "Thank you," she had murmured. Jason's gaze had darkened as he stepped closer, his free hand brushing down her cheek. "You don't have to thank me," he had whispered. "Just let me in." Slowly, carefully, Jason began to chip away at the walls around her heart. He didn't push too hard or demand too much. He was patient, gentle, and persistent. When he took her out for coffee, he listened intently as she spoke, his gaze never wavering from her face. When he arranged candlelit dinners at his villa, he made sure to serve her favorite dishes, even when it meant consulting his chef and making last-minute changes. When he left her notes, they weren't grand declarations of love. They were simple, heartfelt messages. "Thinking of you. Hope your day is as beautiful as you are. I saw a sunset today. It reminded me of your smile. Slowly, day by day, Mishi's guard began to lower. She started looking forward to his texts, her heart skipping a beat when his name appeared on her phone. She found herself smiling when she saw him standing outside her store, waiting for her with that quiet, knowing smile. One evening, after closing the store, Jason had been waiting for her outside. The night air was cool, a gentle breeze brushing through the streetlights. Jason had been leaning casually against his black car, his hands tucked into his pockets, his sharp gaze warming when he saw her step out. "Hungry?" he had asked. Mishi had hesitated. "Jason." He had smiled faintly. "Just dinner," he had promised. No pressure. Against her better judgment, Mishi had found herself sliding into the passenger seat of his car. He had taken her to a quiet rooftop restaurant overlooking the city, the skyline glittering with soft lights. The waiter had barely set down their drinks when Jason's hand had brushed over hers on the table. "You don't have to be afraid of this," he had said softly. Mishi's breath had hitched. "Afraid of what?" Jason's gaze had darkened as he leaned closer. "Of how good it could be," he had whispered. His hand slid over hers, his fingers threading through hers. "If you just let yourself feel it." Mishi's lips had parted, her chest rising and falling as Jason's thumb brushed over her knuckles. "Jason." He had leaned in, his breath brushing over her ear. "Tell me you don't feel it too," he had whispered. Mishi's breath had caught in her throat. Her heart had hammered painfully in her chest as Jason's lips brushed lightly over the edge of her jaw. A tremble had swept through her body, and Jason's hand had tightened around hers. "Say you don't want this," he had challenged. But Mishi couldn't say it. Instead, she had found herself leaning into him, her head resting against his shoulder as Jason's arm curled protectively around her waist. That night, when he had driven her home, he had walked her to the door. Mishi had hesitated before turning to face him. Jason's gaze had burned with quiet intensity as he tucked a lock of hair behind her ear. "Good night," he had murmured. Mishi's lips had parted, but before she could speak, Jason's mouth had brushed over hers, lightly, almost teasingly. A soft, helpless sound had escaped her throat as Jason pulled back, his dark eyes glinting with quiet satisfaction. "Sleep well," he had whispered. Mishi had stood frozen as he turned and walked away. But that night, as she lay awake in bed, her lips still tingling from the warmth of his kiss, she knew that Jason had already begun to unravel her defenses. And deep down, despite her fear, despite the warning bells in her head, Mishi knew it was already too late to stop falling for him. Jason had known from the beginning that Mishi was different, that she was the kind of woman who could either destroy him or heal the deepest cracks in his soul. And the frightening part was that he wanted to give her the power to do both. He had watched her slowly soften around him over the past few weeks, her guarded smiles turning into genuine ones, her wary glances shifting into trusting ones. But tonight was different. Tonight, he needed her to know that this wasn't just a fleeting desire or a passing infatuation. It was deeper than that, more profound and terrifying. That's why he had chosen this place, a quiet lakeside beneath a star-filled sky, the soft hum of crickets blending with the gentle lapping of water against the shore. The air was cool, the soft moonlight casting a silver glow over Mishi's smooth brown skin, her braided hair shimmering under the soft light. Jason stood behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders as she stared out at the lake, her wide brown eyes reflecting the moon's glow. He could feel the slight tension in her body, the way her breath hitched when his fingers slid down the length of her arms, his touch feather-light but deliberate. "It's beautiful here," she murmured. Jason smiled faintly. "Not as beautiful as you," he whispered, his lips brushing against her temple. Mishi turned her head slightly, her gaze meeting his. There was uncertainty in her eyes. a quiet vulnerability that Jason had grown to recognize. Slowly, he stepped around her until they were facing each other. His hands slid down to her waist, his fingers pressing gently against the fabric of her dress. "Mishi," he said softly, his voice low and steady. "I need to tell you something." Her lips parted, her breath quickening as Jason's gaze darkened. His fingers traced lazy circles along her hips, his touch igniting a slow burn beneath her skin. "Jason," she whispered, her eyes searching his face. "What is it?" He stepped closer until their bodies were almost touching, his hands tightening slightly at her waist. "I'm falling for you," he said, his voice raw with emotion. Mishi's breath hitched. Her wide eyes shimmered beneath the moonlight as her lips parted soundlessly. Jason's thumb brushed against her cheek, his gaze unwavering. "I've tried to fight it," he continued. "I've told myself that it's too soon, that it's dangerous, that maybe you don't feel the same way. But I can't stop it, Mishi. I don't want to stop it." Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, her heart racing wildly beneath her ribs. "Jason." He leaned in, his forehead resting lightly against hers. His breath was warm against her lips, his fingers brushing down her back. "I know you're scared," he murmured. "I know you've been hurt before, but I'm not going anywhere." Mishi's eyes glistened, her heart pounding so hard it almost hurt. I don't know how to do this," she whispered. Jason's hand slid up to the back of her neck, his fingers threading through her braids as his lips hovered just over hers. "You don't have to know how," he said softly. "Just let me love you." A single tear slipped down Mishi's cheek, and Jason's thumb was there to catch it. His other hand slid down her back, pulling her closer until her body was pressed against his. Her trembling hands lifted to his chest, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. Jason's breath hitched as her eyes fluttered closed. "Let me love you," he repeated, his lips brushing the edge of her jaw. Mishi shivered, a soft, helpless sound escaping her throat as Jason's mouth trailed down to the curve of her neck. Her hands tightened against his chest as his lips found her ear. "Say yes," he breathed. Her lips parted, her body swaying against his as Jason's hand slid down her back, pressing her even closer. "Yes," she whispered, and that was all it took. Jason's mouth captured hers in a fierce, consuming kiss, his arms wrapping around her tightly as he pulled her against him. Mishi gasped into his mouth, her hands sliding up to his neck as his fingers tangled in her braids. Jason's lips moved against hers with aching tenderness. Yet beneath the softness there was a quiet desperation, a hunger that had been simmering for far too long. Mishi melted into him, her body softening against his as his arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her slightly off the ground. His mouth moved over hers, deepening the kiss until she was breathless, until her knees weakened beneath her. Jason groaned softly as his hand slid down to the small of her back, holding her steady. "God, Mishi," he murmured against her lips. Mishi's breath shuddered as Jason's mouth broke away from hers, trailing down her jawline, his lips brushing against her throat. "Tell me you feel it too," he whispered. Mishi's hands slid up to his face, her fingers brushing over the sharp angles of his jawline. Slowly, she lifted his face until their eyes met. "I feel it," she breathed. Jason's gaze burned into hers, his dark eyes heavy with emotion. He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring the softness of her lips, the sweetness of her breath. His hands slid down her back, molding her against him as his mouth lingered over hers. When he finally pulled away, their foreheads pressed together, both of them breathing hard. Mishi's eyes shimmered as she stared at him, her lips slightly swollen from his kiss. Jason's thumb brushed over her bottom lip, his gaze soft. "Don't run from this," he whispered. Mishi's heart hammered as she closed her eyes. "I'm scared," she admitted. Jason's hand slid up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. "So am I," he whispered. Her eyes fluttered open, and Jason smiled faintly. "But being scared doesn't mean we can't fall," he said. "It just means it's real." Slowly, Mishi smiled, a soft, hesitant smile that made Jason's heart clench painfully in his chest. His hand slid down to her waist as he kissed her forehead. "Let's take it one step at a time," he whispered. Mishi's arms slid around his neck as her smile widened. "Okay," she said softly. Jason's lips curled into a smile as he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly beneath the moonlit sky. His heart pounded wildly as Mishi rested her head against his chest, her arms wrapped around him. And in that moment, Jason knew he wasn't just falling for her. He was already in too deep, and this time he wasn't going to let her go. Jason had spent weeks planning this moment, obsessing over every detail because nothing could be left to chance when it came to Mishi. He knew from the moment she had kissed him that she was different, that she had awakened something inside him that he hadn't even realized was asleep. A longing so deep it made his chest ache every time he thought about her. And now, as he stood beneath a star-lit sky on the rooftop of one of the most luxurious buildings in the city, his heart was pounding harder than it ever had in his life. The rooftop had been transformed into a breathtakingly romantic paradise. Twinkling fairy lights wrapped around the wrought iron railings, casting a soft golden glow over the scene. White roses were arranged in delicate clusters along the perimeter, their fragrant scent mixing with the cool night air. A private violinist stood off to the side, the soft, haunting notes of a love song filling the space. A round table sat in the center, draped in crisp white linen, adorned with lit candles that flickered gently in the night breeze. But Jason wasn't paying attention to any of it. His gaze was fixed solely on Mishi, who stood at the edge of the rooftop, her eyes wide with wonder as she took in the scene. She was breathtaking. Her smooth brown skin glowed under the moonlight, and her dark, braided hair cascaded down her back in perfect waves. She wore a sleek, off-the-shoulder black dress that hugged her slender frame, the slit in the side revealing just enough of her toned legs to drive Jason's pulse through the roof. Mishi turned toward him, her lips parting slightly as her wide brown eyes met his. "Jason, what is all this?" she whispered. Jason's heart thudded painfully against his chest as he stepped toward her, his hands sliding down to capture hers, his fingers laced through hers, and the warmth of her touch steadied his nerves even as his heart hammered wildly. "This," he said, his voice low and rough, "is the night I've been waiting for." Mishi's brow furrowed slightly as Jason led her toward the table. He pulled out a chair for her and she sat down hesitantly, her gaze never leaving his face. Jason poured her a glass of red wine, his hand steady despite the riot of emotions swirling through him. He took his seat across from her, his intense gaze burning into hers as the violinist began playing a softer, more intimate tune. Mishi's hand trembled slightly as she lifted the glass to her lips. "Jason, this is too much. You didn't have to." "I did." Jason cut her off gently. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, as his dark eyes darkened with emotion. "You don't understand, Mishi. From the moment you walked away that morning, I knew I couldn't let you go. I told myself it was just a kiss, that it didn't mean anything. But it did. It changed everything." Mishi's breath hitched as Jason reached across the table, taking her hand in his. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, his touch reverent. "I've never felt this way about anyone," he continued softly. "I didn't think I was even capable of feeling this way, but you've ruined me, Mishi. You've made me crave things I never thought I wanted. Love, family, forever." Mishi's eyes shimmered with tears as Jason's hand tightened around hers. He pushed back his chair and stood slowly. Her eyes widened as Jason dropped down to one knee before her, his gaze never wavering. Her hand flew to her mouth as she realized what was happening. Jason's heart pounded wildly, but his hands were steady as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. The ring inside glimmered beneath the candlelight, a stunning diamond set in platinum, surrounded by smaller diamonds that sparkled like stars. "Mishi," Jason said, his voice low and steady, "from the moment you kissed me, you turned my world upside down. You've made me laugh when I didn't think I could. You've made me feel things I didn't think I was capable of feeling. You've changed me." A tear slipped down Mishi's cheek as Jason's gaze softened. "I want to spend forever with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you in my arms every night. I want to build a life with you, a family with you. I don't care how fast this is or how crazy it seems. All I know is that I love you. I love you more than I've ever loved anything in my life." His thumb brushed over the back of her hand, his eyes burning with sincerity. "Marry me, Mishi. Be mine. Forever." Mishi's hand trembled as Jason slid the ring from the box. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, her heart thundering so loudly it nearly drowned out the soft sound of the violin in the background. "Jason," she whispered, her voice breaking. He slid the ring onto her finger, his hands closing gently over hers. "Say yes," he whispered. Mishi's eyes filled with tears, her breath hitching painfully in her throat. Jason's face was so open, so vulnerable, and she realized in that moment that there was no part of her heart he hadn't already claimed. A tear slid down her cheek as she whispered, "Yes." Jason's breath left him in a rush. His eyes flashed with raw relief and love as he rose to his feet, pulling Mishi into his arms. His mouth crushed down on hers in a deep, consuming kiss, his arms wrapping around her as her hands curled into the back of his neck. Mishi melted into him, her heart racing as Jason kissed her with fierce tenderness. His hands slid down her back, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. When he finally pulled away, Jason's forehead rested against hers, both of them breathing hard. Mishi's hand slid up to his face, her thumb brushing over the rough edge of his jaw. Jason's lips curled into a soft smile as his hand covered hers. "You're mine now," he whispered, his gaze burning into hers. Mishi's breath hitched as Jason's lips brushed over her cheek, trailing down to the curve of her jaw. "Forever?" he added. Mishi smiled, her hand tightening around his. "Forever," she echoed. Jason kissed her again, slower this time, savoring the softness of her lips. When he finally pulled away, he lifted her hand and pressed a soft kiss to the diamond on her finger. "I love you," he said softly. Mishi's smile widened, her eyes shimmering beneath the moonlight. "I love you too," she whispered. Jason pulled her into his arms again, holding her tightly as the violinist's song swelled around them. And in that moment, Jason knew he had found everything he had ever wanted, and he wasn't letting go. Their wedding had been nothing short of a fairy tale. The grand ballroom had been transformed into a breathtaking vision of romance and elegance, with cascading white roses and delicate golden lights illuminating every corner. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above, casting a soft, ethereal glow over the room as guests in their finest attire watched with adoration. Mishi had looked like an angel in her wedding dress, a form-fitting, off-the-shoulder gown made of the finest lace, the long train trailing behind her like a cloud. Her dark, braided hair had been pinned up elegantly, tiny pearls glinting in her hair beneath the delicate veil that had framed her face. Jason had stood at the end of the aisle, dressed in a black tuxedo that fit his powerful frame perfectly, his dark eyes burning with emotion as she walked toward him. His heart had nearly stopped at the sight of her, his hands shaking slightly as he took hers. They had exchanged vows beneath a canopy of roses and golden lights, their voices trembling with raw emotion. Jason had promised to love her, protect her, and cherish her for all eternity. Mishy's eyes had shimmered with tears as she'd vowed to stand by his side through every storm and every sunrise. When Jason had slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her, the world had faded away, leaving only the beating of their hearts and the weight of their promises between them. After the reception, after the guests had gone home and the music had faded into silence, Jason had swept Mishy into his arms, carrying her across the threshold of their honeymoon suite. The suite was a masterpiece of opulence and intimacy, a vast room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, the soft glow of the night casting silver reflections across the sleek marble floors. A massive bed with cream satin sheets stood in the center of the room, rose petals scattered artfully across the surface. A bottle of champagne sat chilling in a silver bucket beside two crystal flutes, and the flicker of candlelight danced across the room, casting golden shadows on the walls. Jason carried Mishy straight to the bed, setting her down gently. His dark eyes burned as they roamed over her face. Mishy's heart pounded wildly as Jason leaned down, his mouth brushing against the delicate curve of her neck. "You're mine now," he whispered, his voice low and rough with possession. His lips trailed slowly down to her collarbone, his breath hot against her skin. Mishy's fingers slid into his dark hair, her breath hitching as Jason's mouth found the sensitive spot beneath her ear. Her eyes fluttered shut as a tremor rolled through her. "Jason," she breathed, her hands curling around the back of his neck. Jason's hand slid down to her waist, his fingers grazing over the satin fabric of her dress. Slowly, carefully, he reached behind her and began to unzip it. The sound of the zipper lowering filled the charged silence between them. Mishy's dress slid down her shoulders, pooling at her feet, leaving her in delicate lace beneath his heated gaze. Jason's eyes darkened as he took her in, his hands sliding up her bare arms before cupping her face. "So beautiful," he whispered, his mouth brushing over hers. Mishy's arms wound around his neck, her lips parting beneath the gentle pressure of his kiss. Jason deepened the kiss, his tongue sliding against hers, slow and unhurried, as his hands roamed down the curve of her back. His mouth left hers only to trail down the column of her throat, his teeth grazing her skin as he pulled her closer. Mishy gasped as Jason's hands slid down to her hips, lifting her easily and laying her down on the bed. He settled above her, his body hard and tense as he braced himself on his forearms. His gaze roamed over her face, his eyes dark and wild. "You're everything I've ever wanted," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Mishy's hands slid down his chest, finding the buttons of his shirt. Her fingers trembled as she undid them, pushing the fabric aside to reveal the hard planes of his chest. Jason inhaled sharply as Mishy's hands glided over his bare skin, her touch setting fire to his blood. He shrugged out of the shirt and tossed it aside, his hands returning to her body. He slid a hand beneath her, arching her into him as his mouth found hers again. His kiss was rougher this time, more desperate. Mishy's hands fisted in his hair as Jason's lips trailed down her neck, across her collarbone and lower. He pulled away only long enough to strip away the rest of her clothing, his dark eyes smoldering as he took her in. "Perfect," he murmured, his voice raw. Mishy's breath hitched as Jason's hands slid down her sides, his touch reverent as though he was memorizing every inch of her. He lowered himself over her, his mouth claiming hers in a kiss so deep it stole the air from her lungs. His hands explored her body with aching tenderness, his fingers tracing the curve of her waist, the soft swell of her hip. Mishy arched beneath him, her breathless moans swallowed by his kiss. Jason's hand slid down her thigh, pulling her leg around his waist as he pressed closer. His lips left hers only to trail down her throat, across her shoulder and lower. Mishy's hands curled into his back, her nails digging into his skin as Jason's mouth explored her body with slow, thorough precision. His name left her lips in a shaky gasp as his hands slid beneath her, lifting her into him. Jason's breath shuddered as he pressed his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered. Mishy's eyes opened, her gaze meeting his beneath the flicker of candlelight. Her hand cupped his face, her thumb brushing over the rough line of his jaw. "I love you too," she whispered. Jason's lips captured hers in a kiss so tender it made her chest ache. He moved slowly, reverently, his body pressed against hers as he guided her through wave after wave of pleasure. Mishy's breath broke as Jason's hand found hers, their fingers lacing together as they fell over the edge together. When it was over, Jason's arms tightened around her, his face buried in the curve of her neck. His breathing was ragged, his heart thundering against hers. Mishy's hands slid into his hair, holding him close as he pressed a kiss to her temple. Jason rolled onto his side, pulling Mishy against his chest. His hand brushed over her back, his touch soft and lazy. Mishy's eyes fluttered shut as Jason's lips brushed against her forehead. "Mine," he whispered. Mishy smiled as she curled closer, her hand resting over his heart. "Forever," she whispered. Jason's arms tightened around her as they drifted into sleep beneath the soft glow of the city lights, lost in each other's warmth. Jason spared no expense when it came to their honeymoon. He whisked Mishy away to the Swiss Alps, where they stayed in a luxurious private cabin perched on the edge of a snow-covered mountain. The cabin itself was a masterpiece of modern luxury and rustic charm, crafted from dark wood and stone, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the snow-capped peaks and the dense forest below. Inside, a massive stone fireplace crackled with warmth, the flickering flames casting golden shadows across the plush furnishings. A fur rug lay stretched across the polished wooden floor, and soft cashmere blankets were draped over the leather sofas. Jason had spared no detail in ensuring the cabin was the perfect romantic escape. Every night, gourmet meals prepared by a private chef were delivered to them, trays of rich Swiss chocolate, delicate cheese platters, and fine wine from local vineyards. Jason had arranged for rose petals to be scattered across their bed each evening, the scent of fresh flowers lingering in the air. Mishy had been stunned by the beauty of it all, but nothing compared to the warmth she felt when Jason wrapped his arms around her. On their third night there, a snowstorm rolled in, cloaking the mountains in a soft white blanket. The sky outside was a swirl of white and silver, the storm raging beyond the safety of their cabin. Jason pulled Mishy into his lap by the fire, wrapping a thick woolen blanket around both of them. Mishy's legs curled over his, her head resting against his chest as Jason's hands slid up and down her back in slow, soothing strokes. The firelight reflected in his dark eyes as he leaned down, brushing his lips against her ear. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me," he whispered, his voice low and rough. Mishy smiled, her heart melting at the tenderness in his voice. Her hand slid up to cup his jaw, her thumb brushing over the rough line of his stubble. "I love you," she whispered. Jason's eyes softened, his hand slipping beneath the blanket to rest on her bare thigh. "Say it again," he murmured. Mishy's lips curled into a soft smile as she leaned in, her mouth brushing over his. "I love you, Jason." Jason's arms tightened around her as his mouth captured hers in a slow, passionate kiss. His hand slid into her hair, tilting her head back as his tongue swept over hers. Mishy's breath hitched as Jason's other hand slipped beneath the hem of her sweater, his palm finding the warm skin of her waist. He lifted her effortlessly, laying her down on the fur rug before the fire. The blanket slipped off her shoulders, leaving her in nothing but a thin camisole and lace shorts. Jason's eyes darkened as they roamed over her body. "So beautiful," he whispered, brushing his knuckles down the curve of her cheek. Mishy's hand slid to his shirt, tugging it up and over his head. Jason's muscles flexed beneath her touch, his breath shuddering as Mishy's hands skimmed down his chest. Jason's mouth found her neck, his teeth grazing the sensitive skin just below her ear. Mishy's head fell back as Jason's hand slipped beneath her top, pushing it up and over her head. His lips trailed down her throat, his hands sliding up her waist as he pulled her closer. "I need you," he breathed. Mishy's fingers slid into his hair as Jason's mouth closed over hers in a kiss so deep it made her toes curl. His hands roamed down her sides, tracing every curve of her body as he pushed her shorts down her hips. Mishy's breath broke as Jason's hands slid beneath her thighs, lifting her effortlessly as he settled between her legs. The fire crackled beside them, the warmth of the flames licking over their skin as Jason's mouth traveled down her body. Mishy's hands fisted in his hair as Jason's lips found every sensitive spot, his touch slow and deliberate as he worshipped her. Her name left his lips in a broken whisper as Jason pulled her hips against him, his breath ragged as he pressed his forehead against hers. "You're mine," he whispered. Mishy's hands framed his face, her eyes locking with his beneath the soft glow of the firelight. "Always," she whispered. Jason's mouth captured hers again as they came together, their bodies moving in perfect harmony. Mishy's breath hitched as Jason's hands slid down her back, pulling her even closer. His lips left hers only to trail down her neck, his tongue tracing the delicate line of her collarbone. Mishy's hands curled into his back as Jason's mouth explored every inch of her, his breath warm against her skin. The fire crackled beside them, the storm raging outside the windows, but they were lost in each other. Jason's arms tightened around Mishy as he guided her through wave after wave of pleasure. Her hands slid up his back, her nails digging into his skin as Jason's breath shuddered. He pulled her tightly against him as they both spiraled over the edge, their hearts thundering in unison. When it was over, Jason collapsed beside her, pulling her into his arms. His hand brushed down her back, his breath still ragged as Mishy's head rested against his chest. Jason pressed a soft kiss to her temple, his arms tightening around her. "I love you," he whispered. Mishy smiled against his skin, her fingers tracing lazy circles over his chest. "I love you too." Jason's eyes darkened as he tilted her chin up, brushing his lips over hers. "I'm never letting you go," he said, his voice low and possessive. Mishy's heart fluttered as Jason rolled onto his side, pulling her against him. The firelight cast a soft glow over their entwined bodies as Jason's hand brushed down her spine, his mouth finding hers again in a slow, lingering kiss. They lay there for hours, wrapped in each other's arms as the storm raged outside. Mishy's eyes fluttered shut as Jason's hand slid through her hair, his breath warm against her ear. "Sleep, baby," he whispered. Mishy's breath softened as Jason's arms tightened around her, his lips brushing over her temple as he held her close. Jason's heart hammered as he watched her drift to sleep, her face relaxed and peaceful against his chest. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, his hand resting over her heart as he whispered, "Forever." Mishy's hand curled over his chest as Jason's arms tightened around her. They fell asleep beneath the soft glow of the firelight, their bodies entwined, their souls connected. Mishy and Jason settled into a life that most people only dreamed of. A life built on love, trust, and the kind of passion that didn't fade with time, but only grew stronger with each passing day. Their home was a stunning glass-walled mansion perched on a hill overlooking the ocean, with sprawling gardens that Jason had filled with Mishy's favorite flowers: white lilies, crimson roses, and delicate jasmine. The scent of blooming petals drifted through the open windows each morning, carried by the soft sea breeze that rustled the sheer curtains. Their mornings often began with Jason waking first, his arm draped protectively over Mishy's waist as sunlight spilled across the bed. He would brush his lips over her bare shoulder, his hand sliding up her side as he whispered, "Good morning, Mrs. Blackwood." Mishy would smile sleepily, turning to press her lips to his jaw. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood." Jason's hand would slip beneath the sheets, his mouth finding hers in a slow, deep kiss that left them breathless before they even got out of bed. Breakfast was always an intimate affair. Jason had hired a private chef, but more often than not, he preferred making breakfast himself. Mishi would sit on the marble countertop in one of his oversized shirts, her legs swinging as Jason stood between her knees, feeding her bites of pancakes or strawberries dipped in chocolate. "You're spoiling me," she would tease. Jason would smile, brushing his thumb over her lower lip. "I intend to spend the rest of my life spoiling you." After breakfast, Jason would head to his office for work, but it never took long for him to find an excuse to pull Mishi into his lap or steal a kiss between phone calls. Mishi had started working on her own projects too. She had opened a boutique downtown, a beautiful space filled with elegant dresses and hand-selected accessories. Jason had insisted on investing in it, but Mishi wanted to build it herself, and Jason admired her independence. Still, he would often show up at the store unannounced, leaning against the doorframe in his tailored suit, watching her with dark, possessive eyes. "Mrs. Blackwood," he would greet her, his voice low and intimate. Mishi would smile, walking toward him as Jason's hands found her hips, pulling her close for a lingering kiss right there in the middle of the store. "Jason," she would murmur, her hands sliding up his chest. "I'm working." "So am I," Jason would reply, his mouth brushing over her ear. "I'm working on making sure every man who walks in here knows you're mine." Mishi would roll her eyes, but her heart would flutter each time he said it. Their evenings were always romantic. Jason often surprised her with candlelit dinners on the beach or private movie nights in their home theater. One night, he set up a blanket beneath the stars, fairy lights strung through the trees. They lay side by side, Jason's arm wrapped around her waist as they watched the night sky. "I still can't believe you kissed me first," Jason said, his voice low. Mishi smiled, her head resting on his chest. "I guess it was fate." Jason rolled onto his side, brushing his thumb over her cheek. "I don't care how it started," he whispered, "as long as it never ends." Mishi's heart swelled as Jason's mouth claimed hers in a kiss so tender it made her toes curl. They made love beneath the stars that night, their bodies moving together in perfect sync. Jason's hands slid over her bare skin, his breath mingling with hers as he whispered, "Forever." Mishi's hands curled into his back as Jason held her close, his heart pounding against hers. Their love wasn't just physical, it was emotional, spiritual, a connection so deep that nothing could ever sever it. Even when life threw challenges their way, Jason was always her rock. When Mishi's mother fell ill, Jason was the one who flew her to the best specialists, who held Mishi when she cried, who reminded her that no matter what happened, they would face it together. When Jason had a difficult business deal fall through, Mishi was the one who sat with him on the floor of their bedroom, his head resting in her lap as she stroked his hair. "We'll figure it out," she whispered. "We always do." And they always did. Jason loved Mishi with a depth and intensity that never faded. He would come home after long business trips and scoop her into his arms, as if he hadn't seen her in years, carrying her to bed and making love to her until they were both breathless. He bought her diamonds and luxury vacations, but the gifts that mattered most were the quiet moments, when Jason would pull her into his arms after a long day and whisper, "I love you," when he would trace his fingers over her bare back as they lay in bed, when he would kiss her forehead and say, "You're my everything." Mishi gave Jason a sense of peace he never knew he needed. He had spent most of his life building his empire, focused only on success, but Mishi showed him how to slow down and savor life. He loved watching her laugh, hearing her stories, and feeling her body melt against his at night. They built a family together, a beautiful baby boy with Jason's dark hair and Mishi's soft brown eyes. Jason was obsessed with their son, spending hours holding him, whispering promises to always protect him. "You've made me the happiest man alive," Jason told Mishy one night as they sat on the nursery floor, their baby asleep in Jason's arms. Mishy smiled, brushing a hand through Jason's hair. "You've given me everything I ever dreamed of." Jason leaned in, kissing her softly. "And I'll keep giving you more," he promised. Their love story wasn't perfect, it was real. There were arguments and challenges, but their love never wavered. Jason had a fierce, possessive love for Mishy, a love that burned brighter with every year. Even after a decade, Jason would still look at Mishy like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. He would still reach for her hand beneath the dinner table, still kiss her breathless when they were alone. "Mrs. Blackwood," he would whisper against her lips, "what did I ever do to deserve you?" Mishy would smile, brushing her hands down his chest. "You kissed me back," she would reply. And Jason would smile, knowing that their love was not just a coincidence, it was fate, and it was forever.